Helen Stubbings from Hugs and Kisses down here in Hobart, Tasmania. I'm popping in to give you another little applique tip. So my version of applique is, I call it glue stick applique, the Hugs and it's using our H&K water soluble, single-sided fusible paper that is iron-on, leave-in for all our applique shapes. We die cut and laser cut an awful lot of our shapes, and particularly for circles, that is the best way to go. It's very hard to trace and hand cut a perfect circle, and if your template isn't perfect, then there's no way that your finished shape is going to be perfect either. You can use circle rulers to draw, and you can use different punches and things or dies that you might have, but if you haven't got any of that, then it's well worth investing a packet of our die cut shapes. Or if you're doing a project such as the Bloomin' Marvellous Block of the Month, then it's well worth investing in the laser cut packet of shapes, where every shape for the pattern is already pre-cut for you, because you know it's all perfect. So I'm preparing spots for one of my blocks. This is the block here, and I'm preparing the dots for it. So I need 12 dots. I've fused them all on, so shiny side onto the wrong side of the fabric. They're quite tiny, so it's a bit hard to see the fuse. You have to hold it up until you can see the shiny side. And I've only left probably a very small 1/4 inch, so more like an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. They're tiny dots, so we're going to use a bit smaller seam allowance. Next is I'm going to cut them out. You can either cut them roughly first, and then once you've got hold of it, cut them around perfectly at once. And again, it doesn't have to be exact. A rough seam allowance, and the more at how much seam allowance you like to work with. These are 1/2 inch. So they're quite small. We do go maybe even smaller actually, but these ones are 1/2 inch. For some of you, perhaps a challenge that you haven't had to do quite this small before, and you might get just a little frustrated. So there are a few and some tips to give you. Eye glue is just with my water soluble glue around the edge of the paper, not on the fabric, and then we do a tiny pinch and gather. Now obviously for this tiny circle, it is a tiny pinch and gather, and you can see why I've gone down to about an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Just pinch and gather. Now the trickiest bit is not getting a point at the get back to the start, so until I've got it down nice and smooth a circle as possible. You have the final step when you're sewing down, particularly if you're doing it by hand, to try and just pull in any little point bit. But the better you can get it at this stage, then the better it is in the long term. For little ones like that, if your thumbnail's just not working, then you can pick up your tools, so your applique tools or whatever you like to use, and a bit at a time just pull it over. You can even use the pointy end so that you're just pulling one little thread at a time onto the glue. In the middle of the end section there, it's easy to go to the middle and then do either side. So that takes a bit longer, but it does get you a very accurate, smooth circle. And the more you practice with the tools, the quicker you get. Now another way is to use 2 layers of paper. So just fuse 2 on top of each other, and it's quite a bit stronger. And then doing it by hand, you've got less chance of it. You you've just got a harder edge that you can feel to push that over. So that's really going on there quite easily because it's quite so stiff. Now obviously it is quite water soluble with a hotter water, but you might have a bit more paper in your quilt there. But for a little dot like that, you're really not going to notice it. And then the final way is again to use 2 layers of paper. And for this you might want slightly more seam allowance than what I've got here. And then I would get a needle and thread, so your applique needle and thread, and I don't have one here with me, sorry, wait a minute. Yes, I do. If I can thread it. And then you do, as I said, a little bit bigger seam allowance than what I've cut here, or else it'll just fray out. Little running stitch, and you've probably all seen this before. I've done this over the perfect circles, done it over sequins, buttons, all sorts of things in the past, but all of those you have to remove it somehow when you're finished. This one you can just keep it in. So then you're just going to draw that up. So gather it over the back of your circle until you've got a nice smooth circle. Now, to do this with 1 layer of fabric, 1 layer of paper, it will just fold up your paper. So that's why we need the 2 layers of paper to be able to use the gathering method. But if you really struggle with fumbly thumbs and you want perfect little tiny dots, then there's 4 ways of doing it. And I'm sure you will end up with, after practice, with perfect circles. And after all, that's what the applique police tend to check first. But we don't worry about that, we're just enjoying the process. So I hope those little tips help you to improve your circles and get perfectly smooth curves and perfectly round dots in your applique work. Bye for now.